Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 62 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Co-op Financial Services. Co-op is your trusted payments processing partner whose mission it is to drive the credit union movement forward. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Marlene Schwartz. Marlene is the board chair of State Department Federal Credit Union, also the board chair of the National Association of Credit Union Chairmen, and if that's not enough, she's now the first volunteer to be on the podcast. We recorded this episode at Q Symposium on the big island of Hawaii, so I greatly appreciate her taking time out of the sun after the day's events were over to sit down with me and have this conversation. We talked about a ton, the role of the credit union board, the relationship to the CEO, and all those lessons she's learned along the way, both around the board table and in her career at the State Department. There were so many leadership nuggets that I think we're all going to take away from this conversation. I found myself smiling a ton and shaking my head yes over and over again. As always, we have some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Marlene Schwartz. Enjoy. Marlene, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I was looking forward to this once Jan told me about you, and then we knew we were going to be at Q Symposium together here on the big island of Hawaii. And when we met at the opening reception, I mentioned to you that you're the first board chair on the show. So thank you for being that as well.
You're welcome. And I'm delighted to play the role of the first board chair because we are leaders in the industry as well as the CEOs. And we deserve the level of recognition that this podcast is giving us. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I know my guess is after talking to you, you won't be the last. So, but you are the first. So a quick question to start. Why is an event like Q Symposium so important for the board chair to attend? And what benefits do you gain that you can, bring back to State Department Federal Credit Union?
Well, it's a way to continue developing our education and training to ensure that we are on the same path as others in the industry. Staying engaged keeps us current and allows us to look at new and different ideas that we might not have thought of if we had stayed more parochial.
I hadn't included this question, but as you were talking, I thought about it. You're the chair, the board chair. Do the other board members also get education along the way at the credit union?
Yes, we have in our board guidelines a mandate that every board member seek education at least once a year.
Okay, so that's really important that we saw over the past few years. So I'd like to expand on that a little bit. I had the pleasure last year of meeting Dr. Luis Ramos and from Nutmeg State Financial Credit Union. And he's on this organization that, quite honestly, I didn't know about, and I feel bad to say. But it was the National Association of Credit Union Chairmen. I know you're also the chair of that organization. So I wanted to hear more about what that organization does and why is it so important for board chairs to have an association of their own?
There are a variety of ways to respond to that. First and most importantly, thank you for including it in the course of the podcast because we are trying to get the word out to more people. We've been in business for over 40 years, and it is the only national level organization that is all volunteers. And our purpose is twofold. A, to let the industry know that we're out there and we operate at the same national level that other organizations do. And B, we are focused almost exclusively on education.
Okay.
And we have a very unique education model. In fact, some of the other organizations have now taken that model and made it their own.
Made it their own as well, huh?
But we sit 10 chairs in a room with a subject, and we talk with one another about our experiences with the subject. And what we have found over the years, and I've been part of this organization for a little over 20 years, but what we have found over the years is that we get two kinds of chairs who are very interested in the organization. One group are chairs who really are seeking information because they need help. And the other group are chairs who are willing to share their information and reach out and help those in need.
Almost the mentoring side of it. That's fantastic. I know from our conversation at the reception, too, it sounds like you have Chairman Hood coming from the NCUA now. So.
We do. Actually, my CEO, Jan Roach, and I had a meeting with him where I had the opportunity to discuss NACUC. He had never heard of us.
Yeah.
And this was his second go-round as a board member at NCUA. So we had a nice long chat, and he ended up asking, would we be interested in having him come to address us? So I'll be working with his chief of staff so that he comes out and he'll be our honored guest for the first time ever.
No, that's fantastic. I know he has been making the rounds. He was on the podcast to start the second season. So he is on the road a lot. So it's great that you're having him out. One of the things that I noticed in the first season talking to CEOs was oftentimes, and you and I were just kind of talking about this before we hit record, is oftentimes for the CEO, it can kind of be an island at the credit union. You have the board above you. You have all, the staff kind of, I don't like to say below you, but, you have the staff and you're just there. Is that similar to the board chair in that role where you have direct connection to the credit union, but you also have the rest of your board, and the buck stops with you.
Right, exactly. And we try to be very careful to ensure that the lines of demarcation are not crossed by either side.
That's your State Department background, yes. The lines of...
Not always successfully, but we do work at that with some degree of regularity. I mean, the one thing that's critical for me as a board member is not to have the other board members be asking staff for work to be done unless that has gone through the CEO and the CEO is A, aware of it, and B, agrees to it. Because we can get enthusiastic and sometimes fall over that line.
I love that. But it sounds like you and Jan have a relationship where that was something you guys talked about right
very
up front.
Early on.
So
yes.
That's fantastic. I had to bring this up. I was excited to hear it. State Department Federal Credit Union was one of the first credit unions to raise their hand with sponsorship of Filene's Center of Excellence for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This is a topic I have tried to keep front and center on the show. Could you tell us, let our listeners know, number one, why for the credit union was an easy yes for you, and for the board to say, we want to commit to this?
I think the answer is the same, both for myself and the board. There were several reasons that we wanted to be out in front of this. Number one is the importance and commitment that we have made to Filene because of all the research they've done over the years and how our members have benefited from that research. So therefore, we thought it was critical to support it. And the other thing was the subject matter, which is a no-brainer for us. We represent members around the world. So it was a match made in heaven. No one even had any questions about it.
That's fantastic. I'd like to make this, this may be an assumption that I'm making, so let me just say that right up front. Your career was in the State Department.
It was, as were most of our board members.
Your board members. And maybe I'm just thinking of movies, TV, that's probably my experience with it, but is it a male-dominated field when you were coming up through it, or has it always been everybody?
Three-piece suit, old white guys.
So my guess is this is something your entire career. Yep, I commend you guys, the whole organization on that. When you look at, I was so excited to ask you this question. When you look at credit unions nationally, as we were about to sit down, you talked about how, there's a pace of change that's happening in financial services across the board. Do you think there's something that credit unions need to fundamentally change to stay relevant, competitive, going forward?
I think there are a lot of credit unions, the larger credit unions in particular, that need to look at the industry and its evolution. And rather than considering merging with smaller credit unions, look at alternatives. Okay. Figure out how you can help them, how you can reach out. Because frankly, if you're a large credit union and you merge with a smaller credit union, perhaps in middle America, you know little or nothing about the needs of those members. And it's probably better for the members to have their own credit union that you as a larger credit union are supporting in the background than it is for them to be merged with a larger credit union where their own culture and identity may be subsumed.
That's interesting to hear you say, being the board chair of a large credit union. And we've seen some of that, but all too often it's been the just merger, and we're seeing the small ones disappear. So I love hearing that. If you were to break out the crystal ball for me, what's something that you're proud of? If we were to sit down at this conference next year, what's something that you're proud of at State Department of CU that the credit union's accomplished in the year to come?
There are so many in the past. And, I find we're more limited, but we do have a unique, what I believe is a unique challenge in front of us for the year to come. We have a CEO and the majority, if not all, of our very senior staff, the chiefs that are directly behind the CEO, all of whom will be retiring within 2 years of one another.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we're in a very critical period of developing and ensuring that both the staff have a plan for forward movement, and that the board has an understanding of that plan, and that the board knows where they can step in and where they shouldn't. One of the things that is critical to both my CEO and I, we do not want to give whoever succeeds her a full deck of brand new people. Okay. We want the new CEO to have the opportunity to make their own selections and begin to build their own team. In a couple of areas, we're not going to be able to do that because we've got a few people leaving before the CEO in critical positions that have to be filled.
If you don't mind me asking, how are you planning for, what is the succession plan? It sounds like that's something that the board is thinking a lot about, as well as working with Jan on. Are you using outside training organizations? Is there something internally you're doing?
No, it's internal, and Jan is doing the bulk of the work.
Okay.
Because she knows what a new CEO is going to need.
Absolutely.
And, we have concepts in our head as board members, but she actually knows the boots on the ground issues that are going to need to be dealt with by a new CEO. And she's trying to put together a timeline with a program plan in place to accommodate all of these things, both, picking the correct new CEO. From the board's perspective, I've been spending a lot of time discussing with board members, what does the State Department Federal Credit Union want to look like in the future? Yeah. Because that will determine what kind of CEO
you hire.
We want to hire.
So another assumption I'm making, but this has to be a big conversation at a ton of credit unions at the board level, right? Where we see the CEO and we know it's an aging population there, and the senior level, let's call it the C-suite, a lot of the times it tends to look alike. So is this a conversation that you're also having at the National Association of Credit Union Chairmen as well?
It's going to be one of our subjects at our October roundtable.
I can imagine that you all would talk about that. So I'd like to move on to the second part of the show. It's all about the leadership and life lessons learned. So, and I was excited, like I mentioned earlier, at ignorance about the State Department, besides what I see on TV and read about. And some things have been in the news recently, let's just say, but we'll leave that there. I'd like to, when I was speaking to Jan, she was telling me that you had quite a career at the State Department, been all over the world. You were telling me about the power converters they give you on your first day. As a traveler, I would love to hear the stories, but how did you choose to make that your career?
I did and I didn't.
Okay.
My brother and I were the first two people in our generation to graduate from college. I come from an immigrant family.
Okay.
And we graduated 1 week apart because my brother went into the military after high school for 3 years.
Okay.
He needed that discipline before he could figure out his future education. So we wound up graduating just 1 week apart from college.
Okay.
So he was first, I was second, just by the dates selected. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I was a political science major. Government always intrigued me, government and politics. I thought at some time I would wind up being a politician.
Okay.
And my dad, who was very well connected in New Jersey, was very close friends with Congressman Peter Rodino.
Okay.
And he came to our house one night and he sat me down and we had a very long conversation. And he said to me, "You belong in the State Department."
Oh, okay. So how old were you then? Was this in college?
I was 22.
22.
I was just out of college.
Okay.
And
sounds like it was some good advice.
He helped navigate my way because awful lot of people need help getting into the State Department because it has traditionally been such a highly respected cabinet position. And so he helped me through that process. We got through the process. They hired me, and I never looked back. Now, one of the beauties of the State Department is everybody's allowed and encouraged to train in a variety of areas and develop a variety of specialties.
Okay.
My specialties were overwhelmingly in the American Citizen Services.
Okay.
Passports, visas, taking care of the current people who have the coronavirus and are American citizens who are stuck overseas. If you have a family member who dies overseas, we help with, getting the bodies back, supporting the family, doing what needs to be done. We do the notifications to people. We register births, American births that take place overseas.
Okay.
So internally, we used to refer to it as the womb to tomb.
The womb to tomb department.
And as long as you were overseas or going overseas, you ran into us. And then the way the State Department is mapped out, traditionally, you get into a discipline like that and you peak. There's nowhere further for you to go in terms of promotions, higher level positions. So you move to another specialty. In my case, it was management.
Okay. All right.
So,
and it sounds like, I know you were all over the world, so that's amazing. What inspired you to go beyond being a credit union member and actually, I guess maybe at first run for a seat on the board?
I, at first, was a member of the Asset Liability Committee.
Okay.
I had been asked by my predecessor, who was board chair at the time, if I would be willing to serve. I was still a very active employee in the State Department, so my concern was I going to have enough time to do it? I come from a family of volunteers. We volunteered for everything historically, so it's part of my nature to sort of step out there. And it was just a natural progression for me to move into the chairmanship after I'd run for the board, been elected, spent about 3 years as a board member, or 4 years as a board member maybe. And then my predecessor came to me and said, "Would you be interested?" There's all of the board at that time was made up of State Department employees.
Okay.
And so the time constraint was tremendous. I was stationed in Washington, so I had the most amount of time to be able to devote to it.
How did the inspiration change once you became the board chair? Was there any change to it?
I think I inspired the board members to look at the credit union at a closer to 30,000 foot level than 5,000 foot level, which is where we were.
All right.
The board members, everybody was in everybody's business at that point in time. And, I knew it was wrong. And my predecessor had decided that she was going to be leaving, so she wasn't going to tackle it. So I began to have one-on-one meetings with the board members who were the most assertive in terms of trying to inject themselves into the operation. And we began to move forward, and now everybody looks from the 30,000-foot level.
Did that need to involve turnover of board members at that point?
Did not.
It did not. So it was
No.
just an educating of board members. Okay, that's fantastic. How would you describe your leadership style? And did it change the further along? You said you got into management. The further along that you went in your career.
In my career, I became an entry-level supervisor very, very early in my career. And the best way to learn to manage people is to learn about the people. And the best way to learn about leadership is to make mistakes. So I made mistakes early on, but I internalized my lessons from those mistakes so that I would not make them again. And then you begin to grow exponentially when you understand yourself and your limitations. And I have many. I'm a Jersey girl. I shoot from the lip, and so I just sort of jump out there into the fray regularly, but there's never any animosity associated with it. And I work really hard at not being judgmental. But more important to me as a leader is I have to understand the people I'm leading, or I cannot lead them.
Yeah, that's. I think that's great advice. That's for sure. As a leader, is there something that maybe when you think back to the State Department, either people heard you say over and over where they could finish your sentence, or is there something you say to Jan so often that she's like, I know, I can finish that sentence?
Yeah, there's probably more than one thing. There's a whole variety of those. I can't come up with one specifically right now, but as we talk, something will come up.
So one of the questions I added to the second season was, and it was really came from some of the conversations that were being had, and that idea that as a CEO, but I think my guess is as a board chair also, and even just as a manager, you have to make that tough decision that isn't popular. I'm sure you've had to do that many times. My question is, was there something, or how did you instill that in yourself to have the ability to make that tough decision?
I think any decision you make, you have to look at what the goal is at the end of that process. And if the goal is worth it and will bring positive results, then you have to steel yourself and make the decision. If you are not up to that challenge, you shouldn't be in a leadership position.
Yeah. Is there a common myth about leaders or leadership that you would want to debunk?
One of the things that I believe is very important is that most people think leaders have the power, and they really don't. They have only as much power as the people they lead are giving them. And
that's a great point.
And you have to understand how to internalize the concept of power while not abusing it.
That is a great point and great advice, I think. A lot of people will be writing that one down. When you mentioned learning from mistakes, when you think back to early in your career, was there a mistake that you made or one that you see young leaders make all the time?
Well, I think young leaders now make different types of mistakes because they work from certain assumptions.
Okay.
And young leaders now tend to step out more aggressively. And if they would step back and listen and internalize some of what they're hearing, they might go in some different directions. I never said I'm the boss.
Right.
And, one of the things I learned from very early on, there was a young woman who was part of my team who was very, very angry. And she was angry because my predecessor had passed over her for promotion a few times. And when I began to understand what her motivations were for the anger that was addressed towards me, I tried to sit down and have a conversation with her, and I did not lay the groundwork for that conversation.
Okay.
And that was a huge mistake. And from that, I learned an awful lot about how to deal with sensitive issues with employees.
When you say lay the groundwork, do you mean like in an email or setting the, I mean, like, this is what we're going to talk about.
Before email.
So.
No, I would have gone now, as I look back, I would have handled it very differently. I would have gone to her and I would have said, I understand there were some differences between you and my predecessor. Okay. And when you're ready to discuss it so that we can discuss it jointly, I'd like to sit down and speak with you. So I would have kind of smoothed the way.
Absolutely. I see
opposed
exactly
to
what you're
just
saying.
Calling her in and doing
and being right there where she wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
That's great advice there. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you found yourself going back to throughout your career, or one that, just you kind of hold on to?
The one that I think gives me the most challenge still is the count to 10 before you react. There's an awful lot of merit in that, but it's so hard to do. I
agree with you as well. So, yeah, on an earlier podcast, he's a leadership. I'm not sure if he's ever been in a CUES conference, but he's got some leadership books out there. And one of the things he talked about was when someone's talking, and but it reminded me so much of the count to 10. He was like, repeat in your mind what they said first before you react, because then if you were listening to the whole thing or not, right? So
that's excellent advice.
Really, I've tried to do that now.
I need to take that.
His name was John Spence, but it was something I took from that podcast, and I'm like, I need to do more of that. So one thing that I noticed in the first season also was how important mentors were. Did you have any mentors, going up?
I had 3 mentors in my career in the State Department, and one mentor in my role as board chair. There is one crossover. Okay. The mentor for board chair and one of the 3 mentors I had in my career is the same person.
The same person. Okay.
So, but yeah, I had very early in my career, I had a man who was a senior level in the State Department, saw something in me that he thought was going to be very important. I was at that point in the passport system. Okay. And he took me aside and he mentored me to learn the ins and outs of the bureaucratic stuff that goes on behind the scenes to get to where you needed to be. And those were some life lessons that I have kept with me forever and ever.
It's so amazing. You're not the first person on the show who said somebody saw something in them and kind of almost pulled them up, said, hey, you're coming with me now. Yep. So it's that's fantastic. I hope we all can do that for somebody. Was there ever a point in your career where you felt a little bit lost?
Oh, several times.
Yeah. How did you work your way through that?
Slowly.
Okay.
Very carefully. Doing a lot of research, understanding why I felt lost and what I could do to fix it. And very often it was reaching out to one of my mentors. Okay. And sitting down with them and saying, look, here's the issue. I'm totally lost on this, or I didn't get that promotion and the person who got it, I thought should not have gotten it. Not necessarily that I was the best choice, but I thought they had made a serious mistake. And I had to talk that through with several people in order for myself to get past those nasty feelings I was having.
Before I move on to the last part of the show and we have a little bit of fun, I love asking, when you take off the credit union hat, not the board chair, what do you do outside of the State Department, outside of, to unwind? Where do you...
That one's easy for me. I get on a train, head to Manhattan, and do Broadway shows.
Oh, do you have a favorite?
Well, I just recently saw the revision of My Fair Lady, and it was wonderful.
I've lived now in Connecticut for a couple of years, and Jill and I, from time to time, will drive until traffic starts, jump on the train, and head into the city. And we're lucky to live close enough to just get on a train and do it. So it's... We actually took her son over Christmas, and it was fantastic. Last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be, but we get to have a little bit of fun. It sounds like you had big plans while you were in high school. What were you like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got in memorable trouble?
Oh, I remember the memorable trouble very, very well. And it was a typical kid thing. We had 5 and dimes back then.
Yeah, okay.
Our local one was Woolworth's. And I went and stole lipstick.
Oh.
And I was 9 years old.
Okay.
I got caught stealing the lipstick. My parents had to come in.
Oh, you got caught in the store? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's one you remember forever.
But what were you like in high school? Good in school? Good academics?
Yeah, I was very, very tied to the books.
Okay.
That was a big deal to me. Again, the results of an immigrant family.
Yeah.
The people who came before me were not well educated, so they really did stress the importance of education, both at that level and then at the higher level.
I always think that's so amazing when you hear about people's parents who maybe weren't educated, but yet they knew the importance and stressed it. When Maurice Smith from Local Government Credit Union was on the podcast, he talked about at 14 that his dad said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he happened to go in a bank and see a guy in a white shirt and air conditioning. So he decided he wanted to be a bank president. But his dad was a farmer, and he said his dad would quiz him on Keynesian economics when he got home at night. And I remember going, how did your dad know that? Did he have to learn it along the way too? So, to have those parents that they valued education.
Well, and my dad is a typical example of that sort of thing. When I was in high school, you had 2 tracks, basically, what they called the commercial track and the academic track.
Okay.
And he said to me, "I'm not going to put you in the commercial track. I don't want you to learn how to type. I want you in a position where somebody's going to type for you."
That's beautiful. You're like, "Thank you, Dad." So this was another question I was so interested to ask you. Most of us in the credit union world have stumbled into the career in credit unions. We didn't grow up saying, "I want to work in a credit union someday." So before the State Department, what did you mentioned being a politician? Is that what you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. I was going to be Congresswoman for my district in New Jersey.
Oh, that's awesome. But so instead you made a career.
And then I learned about politicians and decided, I don't want to be one.
You don't want to do that. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off? You can see I have my journal next to me. It's the first thing I do every morning is write down a few things. But
the last thing I do every night,
okay,
and have done it for years and years, is reflect on the day that I just had. What could I have done differently? What am I proud of that I did that day? What was something that was just mediocre that I might be able to improve on, but I might not want to? And did I treat myself well that day?
That's interesting. Did you treat yourself well? That to me is extremely self-aware. It takes a lot of us a long time to realize that, that we have to treat ourselves well.
It's what happens when you get old.
I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. The random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to over and over.
I've got 1,000 of them because I'm a real music person. I grew up in a musical household, but the one I go to repeatedly is Neil Diamond's The Jazz Singer.
Gosh, I think somebody else mentioned that one on the podcast as well. So I think you might be number 2 on that one. I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in our house that I will tell you keeps growing now because of the podcast and people recommending them to us. Is there a book that you've either gifted over time or just one that you think everybody should read?
The one that always comes to mind and that I gift routinely to every child that I give a gift to who's turning from 12 to 13.
Okay.
They get a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird because there are tremendous life lessons, a variety of life lessons in that book. And when you're turning age 13, you're still young enough to be able to absorb what the lessons are in the book. But you're old enough to absorb the lessons that are in the book, but you're still young enough not to be tainted.
That's a beautiful point. That book was one that we had to read in high school, and I wasn't as good of a student as you were. And I So I didn't remember any of it. But as I started reading as an adult, it was one of the first books that I'm like, I need to read that one again. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love having that on the list. So we have a book list of every book that's been recommended. So that's fantastic. And that one I don't have to buy because I do own a copy. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question is, what's become less important?
Well, what's become less important is I no longer have the career drive that I used to have, and I'm glad to be rid of it. It's a very freeing experience not to have to compete in your career to move forward.
Okay.
That is a totally freeing experience.
What's become more important?
My health.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
Experiences. I travel a lot.
You still travel a lot because you did for your career, right? So
yes.
Now it's something that you kept in you. Yep.
Just kind of stays with you. You can learn so much from being an observer of other people's culture. I
could not agree with you more. I'm 45 years old. Before 7 years ago, I hadn't left the country.
Oh my!
I grew up in Detroit, so I'd been to Canada, right? But in the past 7 years, I went to Barcelona with a friend 7 years ago, and I was like, it changed my life. And now I've been to 47 countries, I think it is, in the last 7 years.
Yep.
So, because I can't get enough of the experience, the learning that you do on the ground, meeting people and just seeing,
And every part of the world gives you a very different experience.
Absolutely.
And there's beauty in all of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting because you traveled for work as well. I get that a lot from people. We go to a lot of these conferences and do all that, but that's what I do in my spare time. Is we like to travel. So there's a question that I didn't send you. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Ella Fitzgerald.
Tell me why.
She was well before her time. She had a variety of things going against her, including her race, her size, her upbringing, and she managed a career that was very, very important to her, and she was able to get the world to rally around her because of her talent, but more importantly, because of her skill, the way she used that talent.
I love that. That is the reason I love asking that question, is because we all define success differently, right? And so that's you just made me smile while answering that. I thank you again for being on the show. I think that's the perfect way to wrap up. The last question that I have for you, do you have any asks of our audience or final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yes, I would like anybody in your audience who is a board chair or someone who aspires to be a board chair to go on to the NACUC website. It's nacuc.org.
We will link to it in the show notes too. Yep.
Look at the organization. Any of us on the board would be happy to speak with you about what we get from the organization and see if it's something you would be interested in.
Oh, thank you so much for taking your time out today to be on the show. If people have additional questions of you after hearing you talk today, is there a preferred method of contact? Email?
There is. My email.
Okay.
Which I stay very disciplined with. I only read it once a day.
Very smart.
And if anybody else needs to reach me, they have to phone me.
So,
but
we will link to your email address in the show notes if you don't mind, and people can ask you more questions there.
Yeah, so. Not at all. I'd be happy to answer anything. And let me thank you for having the vision to open up this podcast to volunteers who play a critical role in the credit union industry.
I thank you again. I hope you have an amazing day and a great rest of the conference, and enjoy.
Yeah, now I'm going to the pool.
Before we go, I would love to take a minute to thank you, all of you, our listeners, for once again taking the time out of your day to spend a little with us. Again, thank you to Marlene for coming out of the sun and sitting down in the conference room with me. I greatly appreciate it. She was amazing. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Co-op Financial Services. Make sure to click on their link in the show notes to see everything they have going on. Also, we are on all the podcast players out there, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're there. We would appreciate if you subscribed, leave us a 5-star rating, maybe even a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It helps with the visibility of the show and lets us spread the credit union love. If you don't think we're worth 5 stars, forget I asked. Just reach out to me directly and let me know what we can do better. And one last thing. Remember the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. You can get your next book recommendation from the guests that have been on our show all in one place. Thank you again for listening. Have a great day.